From war zones to natural disasters and also hostage negotiations. So Andy has done it all basically. He's been around the world to the most dangerous places that you can imagine. And yeah, he has over a decade experience and has been 58 times abroad on global NGO missions. So thank you very much, Andy, for being here, and if you would like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Inga. Thank you for this invitation. It's always good to share learning from different perspectives, and it's been a pleasure to follow some of your podcasts. I almost fell into humanitarian work after a career in policing. Policing is very good because you see both the good and bad in life, and you also get a lot of skills, like any service, public service that you're in. And my specialist skill as a hostage negotiator was what brought me into humanitarian work. And I've stayed there since. And I've had the pleasure of being able to apply a lot of the skills and experience that I've learned in policing into my humanitarian work.
Okay. So what exactly makes it that difficult to negotiate in the humanitarian sector? What is different from the police?
Well, I suppose what's different from the police fundamentally is you don't have all the resources you would normally have within policing in terms of that tactical support and some of the technical support that you would have. But having a really good awareness of that and understanding how to build teams, because negotiation is a team job in terms of how you do that and how you engage with the other side. But also having that critical mind in terms of knowing how to apply certain tactics at certain times, but also an ability to analyse and assess intelligence that you get from dialogue and intelligence that comes from other sources. I suppose when I describe it to other people, it's like taking a 1,000-piece jigsaw and tipping it onto a table and then trying to build it without having the benefit of looking at the picture of the jigsaw. So it's pulling all these different pieces together, and that's very much teamwork, not only from an international perspective, but very much a local perspective, especially if the dialogue is in a different dialect.
Yeah, I think that could be very difficult, right? With the different languages, the different cultural backgrounds, and you still need to work together as a team. Right?
Absolutely. The way that I've always done that. I've had the pleasure of training negotiators for over 20 years now, both within the law enforcement world, but also outside of that. And it's very easy it's certainly easy for me to judge what negotiation skills people have, because it tends to follow the normal bell curve. So you would have individuals, a very small minority, who are actually very natural negotiators. They tend to be a little bit introverted and quieter. Then the vast majority of people you can train, and you can enhance these skills in training. And then, as you know, I'm sure you've met some of these individuals, the person that you could put in an empty room that would end up having a fight with themselves, who would never be a negotiator in 1,000 years. So it's that ability to select the right members of the team, to form that team, to help lead that team, and importantly, with each interaction with captors, is you do a briefing beforehand, so you know what you want to achieve in that dialogue. But importantly, after the dialogue, is that you sit down to say, okay, how do we think that went? How do you think we can improve? So it's that continual learning, and it's really important to document the progress you make in negotiations, because it's very, very easy to get disheartened when you think you're making progress and you don't actually know where the hostage is, or you don't know how the hostage is, and then people suddenly grab onto a little bit of hope, and then their emotions go quite high, and then you've got to say, well, we don't actually know where they are. So measuring that progress actually helps you and the team, but also helps the crisis management team appreciate what progress you are making.
Okay. So what skills in particular are you looking at? You already said not having fights with yourself is very important. Maybe not being too emotional, maybe being a little bit quieter. I can imagine active listening is also important for negotiation. But what other skills are you looking for if you're forming your team?
So for me, I mean, the most important thing is our ability to control our own emotions, because we appreciate that most of the decisions that we make as human beings are based on emotions. So it's being able to manage that. It's looking at the information factually. It's our ability to actively listen. There's a reason that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and it's our ability to use them in that proportion. So active listening is a massive skill we actually all have, but a lot of us choose not to use it. So when we use that skill combined with some empathy, so trying to understand the other side, we naturally start to build rapport. And when you're in that rapport stage, you can start to suggest, and you start to influence, and you start to persuade the other side. That is difficult. It's almost like a game of mental chess with the other side. So you've got to be able to gather a lot of intelligence to be able to figure out how you want to move forward in your dialogue, be able to choose the tactics that you're going to deploy, and then very carefully negotiate with the other side on the basis that you want to understand what is the motivation of the other side. Now, in a lot of terrorist cases, that motivation might be instrumental. So it might be they want ransom. And again, if you look at the insurance world, they can give you sort of indications of what the going rate is in each different country. So having a good understanding of that helps. But if it's expressive, so if it's very much an ideological base that we might have seen with ISIS in the beginning, then that's more difficult, because we know from research that there is a higher likelihood of the hostage not surviving. And that tends to coincide with a high media campaign from the other side. So there are lots of different tactics that we can see, but understanding the motivation of the other side is really important. And that's where having a local team supported remotely, you can understand some of the local dynamics, understand the relationships within the community, and then start to understand is how do you navigate a way forward in terms of that dialogue to try and get resolution.
Okay. Can you give some examples maybe of the missions that you made? Where have you been to maybe get a better understanding of what you did?
Yeah, so I, when I first entered into the humanitarian world, I was asked to support an NGO where the country director had been kidnapped in Afghanistan, and I got involved. I was allowed to select the local team. I was able to do that. And trained the local team, built the capacity of the team actually very quickly. And then we started to engage. We didn't know where the country director had been taken. We didn't know who had taken him. So it was working with the local community, with local Arbabs, etc., to try and find out any leads in that investigation. And once we started to get that, it was then that engagement. And that engagement was very difficult, because like any terrorist organisation, they are trained in the same techniques that we are trained in. So it's very much down to your capability. And it was in that dialogue that we were able to not only identify that our country director was okay in terms of his health, we were able to get proof of life, which took some time to gain, but we were also able to get the Taliban to look after him, which is really important. And they gave him a radio, so he had a wind-up radio. So he was able to listen to the Vatican News and BBC World News every single day, which was really important in terms of his psychological welfare, and also in his ability to recall how he was treated and how many times he was moved. So Afghanistan, I've had lots of involvement with Afghanistan, but because we cover so many different missions, I spend a lot of time getting to know the country, getting to understand the culture. And my first mission was to Nigeria, where we set up the mission in Adamawa State and Borno State, which, as you know, is the backyard of Boko Haram. So understanding the dynamics there, teaching the team how to integrate safety and security at the beginning, which I think is really important, because there is always a tendency, and I've seen it in my 10 years, where people try to bolt on safety and security, and it doesn't work. We all have the frustration, as I'm sure you know, that safety and security is down at the bottom of the pile in terms of funding. So it's how do we maximise our impact when we have little budget and we have to work really well at building relationships. And when I was in Nigeria, I trained a team and very quickly realised that I was teaching them the skills that I learned in the Boy Scouts, like how to change the wheel in the car, how to do some very, very basic stuff. And I thought, I got the impression that as soon as I leave, they'll go back to what they've always done. So how do I create that capacity in the country? So I've spent years working across missions in Africa, Middle East, the Far East, developing safety and security advisors at a local level. So we get individuals in the staff that are keen to develop their own skills in safety and security. I use some of the programs that are available. I link them to INSO, if INSO's operating in country, get them onto GISF in terms of the Global Interagency Security Forum. And I develop their skills, so I, to a large extent, mentor them and oversee what they do. And that's allowed me to develop them. There's always a risk that when you do that with individuals, they say, okay, well, I don't get paid enough money here. I'm going to go to another NGO and make more money. So I'm very selective in who I pick, because I want to make sure that they are aligned with the mission that we have, because it's a faith-based organisation. And that has worked really well. It's worked really well in Latin America, where we have missions that both the police and military can't go into, because we operate in areas that are controlled by the cartels, and we operate very successfully in these areas. So I suppose my impression of safety and security is it's very easy to want to go in and say, this is what you must do. But my experience, particularly with a faith-based organisation, if you do that, the barriers go up and they just ignore you. So for me, it's been very much a big negotiation. So it's about how do you gently influence, gently persuade, use the stories within the organisation to help develop some of the capability and capacity within these different country missions.
Okay. So does it that you have a faith-based organization, or that you work with faith-based NGOs, does it make it easier or harder to work in certain countries?
Oh, that's a difficult question. When I first started, I got told on many occasions, thanks very much for your input, Andy, on safety and security, but it's okay, God will protect us. And I say, yeah, absolutely, I don't disagree with that. And then I say to them, I says, but why do you think God sent a Scotsman to look after you? So a lot of the time, my role is to help them get to the areas where they need to go in terms of conducting their mission, because it takes a different perspective. If they are given a mission, they see that mission as a mission from God. So they need to go, no matter how dangerous it is. So my job is to try and figure out a way for them to do it safely, which is kind of different from what you would see in a conventional NGO. That comes with a lot of delicate negotiations. It comes with a lot of risk analysis and how you manage that risk. And we don't have the budget, and never would have the budget, to have all the bells and whistles you would normally associate with a big organisation like the United Nations. So we learned to have really good community acceptance, because we are an integral part of the community where we work, and it's how we identify the key influencers in these communities and work with them and bring a benefit to the community. So most of the work that we do is either through education, it's either through livelihood programs where we teach skills for them to develop small businesses to bring a benefit to the community. It's through advocacy at the highest levels, particularly in areas of severe conflict, like you're seeing in Ukraine, for example. And it's also, we've recently, in the last number of years, introduced MHPSS, so mental health and psychosocial care, to a lot of the communities that we serve, because it's a recognition that a lot of the people that have been displaced and the children that have been displaced have seen things that you or I would never want to see in our lifetime. So how do we give them that support? And one of the approaches that I've seen that sort of lifted my eyes a bit was the long-term approach. So there is a saying that's related to Confucius that says, if you go for a year, plant rice. If you go for 10 years, plant trees. If you go for 100 years, educate children. So the basis of educating children is to help them understand what peace is and how you can achieve peace. So there's a lot of work that we do around about reconciliation. That's difficult. That's really difficult work. How do you bring two parties that have been in conflict together to allow them to move forward amicably and in peace? So there's a lot of really good work that we do quietly in the background to try and move these things forward in all the different challenges that you have operating in these different countries, from conflict to wars to natural disasters to climate change, etc. So there's never a dull day, as I say to a lot of my friends, in terms of the work that I do.
Yeah. You talked a lot about mental health, especially in working with children. I think that's very important, that you don't have this downward spiral of war and trauma and more war and more trauma. How do you work with the staff on their mental health? Because of course, for the refugees or for displaced people, it's very important, but also for the staff. You talked that people have been kidnapped in Afghanistan. How do you debrief the team about it?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. A number of years ago, I was on the board of advisors for this NGO, and we pulled together a staff care programme. And the staff care programme had four main pillars. So the first pillar was safety and security, to make sure that, when the staff go into different areas in terms of travel risk management, in terms of needs assessment when we set up a mission, that we do proper risk analysis to identify not only the risks but the culture in terms of how we work in that. And the second part was an employee resilience programme, so that recognising that not every member of staff might want to speak to the line manager or their supervisor, that they have the ability to reach out to an independent organisation if they're feeling stressed or have experienced trauma. So that has been really beneficial. And also organisational policies, so that you have a consistent application of policy right across the country missions that's aligned to local laws and regulations. And finally, I think it's round about the culture of the organisation. It's the culture that I have in the organisation I work with it's almost like a big family. So it's recognising, like any family, there'll be disagreements and people will fall out, but collectively we are all bought into the mission that we have, and it's supporting each other through that. And that has made a big difference because people feel supported. A lot of them, I would say, the vast majority of all the missions know who I am and all have the ability to pick up the phone and speak to me. Like any security advisor, what you want to do is for them to phone you at an early stage so that you can help them intervene and navigate any crisis. And I've focused a lot on training to make sure that all the staff have a basic minimum standard in terms of training, but also that is layered on with the training that's provided by INSO in country where they are, the training that is available online through Disaster Ready, for example, the good guidance that comes from GISF and some of the documents that they produce and research that they do. But also I layer that on with training that I deliver and some of the security advisors that we have deliver, to give the staff the right skills. And a lot of these skills, as you know, are very simple skills, and particularly when people are stressed, people are under lots of pressure, it's their ability to know that they can pick up the phone and speak to someone who is able to help calmly navigate them through what is a difficult time. So that almost holistic approach to staff care has been very, very good in terms of not only supporting the staff, but also in terms of staff retention.
Yeah, I think that's very important that they know they can talk to someone who's also not judgmental, not saying, hey, why are you calling me in the middle of the night, or why don't you mind your own business, whatever, that they know that there is someone who is willing to help. Like you said, also calm, active listening, I guess, comes to play again. So yeah, I think you already do like a lot of safety and security for your staff. If there's anything you can wish for or that you can improve, what would it be?
Anything I could wish for. Sometimes there are challenges, particularly as you know from your own background, in getting, leadership sometimes to engage in crisis management training, because they all think that they know what to do. But as Mike Tyson famously said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So for me, it's the country officers are very good at doing the crisis management training to run through scenarios so that they are prepared when the worst happens. But I would like to see more of that at the higher level in the organisation, where they buy into that and where they understand that different style of leadership. Because in a faith-based organisation, the leadership is probably what we would regard as a bit slower paced. So they would particularly go away, they would discern, they would pray about maybe changes to the organisation, changes to policy, changes to how we move forward. But in a crisis, you don't have that luxury. So it's understanding what command leadership is like and how that works and how fast paced it is. That allows, you can do that through crisis management, exercising, which just gives them that awareness. It's never going to be second nature for them, but it gives them that awareness that there is a capability there, and then it's so they're not frightened to step into that world, which is sometimes quite difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially what you're saying, that the leadership style might change if the crisis is happening. Because how I see it, you should ask a lot of questions in the beginning, like the staff should know what they're doing, why they're doing it, etc. Also, maybe if they have concerns, because sometimes if we work on the ground, you have different experience than if you work in the leadership level, and the leadership needs to know what's going on. Yeah, but of course, in terms of crisis, then the leadership or the leader should say something and it's done and not question. So I can imagine that switch is very, very difficult to implement.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is down to, I spend a lot of my time making sure that I've got good relationships with the country directors, and you know yourself that if you're speaking to somebody on the phone, you can pick up whether they're stressed or not, and it's being supportive in that phase to make sure that the individual is supported in their home environment or their work environment. So you help them to manage that stress to come through the other side. And a lot of the comments I get back, particularly when we've taken country teams through abject crisis, is they see that we have taken them from the darkness into the light.
Okay, cool.
And that's very, very touching. But from a faith-based perspective, it took me a little bit of time to understand their perspective. Because if someone has deep faith, then suffering is okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you suffer, you can bring God's kingdom. And getting your head around that from a logical point of view is actually quite challenging. So I've spent a lot of time reading scripture, immersing myself in my own faith to try and understand how they think. And that helps massively when you're trying to guide them through a crisis, because you know how they think and you know how they might react. But at the end of the day, they're a human being and they are subject to the same stresses and strains that we all are. So it's being able to recognise that and being able to carefully navigate them into a safe space so they can look after themselves.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you're saying, that people who are Christians, that they think, of course, a certain amount of suffering is okay, I would say, or even maybe necessary if you go to a country which is quite hostile. Of course, you don't have all of the comfort you have at home, but also to know when the suffering is a little bit too much and maybe dangerous for them and the organization, that they have a feeling for it, even though they're Christians and they want to be good Christians, that they know when they don't need to suffer alone anymore.
And that's a real challenge. Let me tell you, it's a real challenge when you're in the midst of a crisis and you have an individual who has a very deep faith, who is quite prepared to stand on the doorstep and embrace their enemy with love. That's a real tough negotiation, and that is down to the relationships you have with them and their trust and faith in you in terms of the support that you give them, but also your knowledge of the mission and your knowledge of Scripture. So, there's been many times that I've had to use that in the negotiations to be able to help take some individuals to safety.
Yeah, no, I can imagine that is very challenging. If you look in the future maybe a little bit, how do you think NGO work will change? Will it get easier? Will the world get more hostile? What will happen in the future? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we've seen over the last number of years that the change, there's been a significant change in the fact that the protection that used to be afforded to humanitarians is gone, and we've particularly seen that in Gaza. So that is something that it would be wonderful if that came back, but I'm not holding my breath in relation to that. I think, given the massive funding cuts right across the world in terms of the work that we do as humanitarians, there is more that we can do to collaborate, to work in partnership on the ground. When I speak to other, fellow colleagues that are in other NGOs and say, "Oh, well, I've got this budget for this and I've got this budget for this," I'm thinking, "Well, I've never had that." So I've had to learn to work with the stuff that we can get that doesn't cost anything to the organisation, and where I don't have the skills, my network is good, and I can usually find someone within my network that is prepared to offer some pro bono time to help upskill some of my team. And it's that building of the capability and capacity of the organisation, because the challenges will keep coming. We do have the benefit of, there's lots of analysis these days, particularly some of the climate analysis, that can tell us, where to have a base and what sort of construction that work office should have, so it can withstand some of the difficult weather. We had a mission in Maban where every single year it would get flooded from the rainfall from the Ethiopian highlands. So it took us years to be able to put the right measures in place to divert that floodwater so that we could still stay there and serve the community and still function during these difficult times of flood. So a lot of the more scientific stuff that allows us to anticipate that is really good. And I think for me, I approach my work quite simply. I operate on probably 3 principles. So awareness, so understanding what the risk is. So that means upskilling the staff and training, really understanding the country, understanding our community acceptance, anticipation. So the anticipation is what can we accurately anticipate? So we get that from community interactions. All the experience I've had in policing and in this world is that community will know when something's not right, and they'll tell you. So it's picking up on that, combined with the intelligence that you might get from INSO and other sources, that allow you to say, okay, right, well, we know that this insurgency is moving towards us. What are we going to do? Can we hibernate? So can we hibernate? How long for? Is our office strong enough to hibernate? Or do we need to relocate? How quickly can we do that? What route do we take? And then I suppose, the last thing is evacuation out of the country, which is one that, we try not to do. But certainly when we saw Afghanistan back in 21, that was something that we had to do. And that's massive, being able to do that. That's something that I don't think will happen now because of the shift more to the right, where unfortunately people that have been displaced, that have migrated to different countries, are getting to the stage that they're not welcome so much anymore. And there is that shift to the right, so that really concerns me. Because at the end of the day, we're supposed to, according to the Bible, love our neighbour. But unfortunately, we don't see much of that these days.
True.
So for me, the future is, I wouldn't say it's bleak. I'm just saying that there are more challenges ahead that we can prepare for and we can navigate, but it's tough. It's tough.
I totally agree with you. And in terms of stuff, so if someone wants to get in the field of NGO safety and security like you do, how can people prepare for these challenges?
I think there needs to be a blended approach. I've seen a lot of young people that want to come into the humanitarian world to get really excited because they're going to go to, say, for example, a mission in Africa because they've never been there, and almost spend more time on their social media saying, "Oh, look at me here," and Instagram pictures and all that sort of stuff, which really annoys me. It's that blend of doing, education, so your research, doing proper programming, getting proper training, so that you have good awareness. But also when you go into country, it's going in on a basis that you are a guest in their land. You're not there to tell them what to do. You're there as a visitor to that time and place, and it's to respect that. And I think that's really important. And to have that blended approach where you continually learn, you make sure that you keep your skills up to date. You speak to other NGOs, so you develop a good network. So your network is really, really important. But you also take the time to sit down and to embrace the humility that you sometimes get doing the work that we do. And I always remember as a father sitting at a camp in Nigeria, and I'd taken a small football for the kids to play football. I can't play football to save myself, but I taught the kids how to play football, and they were having a great time. And I sat at the side and sat next to one of the mothers, and she was crying. And I said to her, I said, hopefully these are tears of happiness. And she goes, yes, my 3 sons are playing football. It's wonderful to see. Thank you so much for showing them how to do it. She says, but they're also tears of sadness. Tears of sadness because my 2 daughters got killed by Boko Haram just for going to school. And then suddenly, as a dad of a 4-year-old, you think, I feel so fortunate to live in a country where my daughter can go to school without having that threat. And I think it's understanding that humility and understanding and reflecting on how lucky we are. But we have a gift, and that gift is to be able to help others to navigate some of the challenges that sometimes are really complex, but the skills that we can have can help people navigate that safely.
Yeah, I think that's the wonderful story you're telling there. Story of sadness and hope, of course. So, like you're saying, we're very fortunate. We sometimes don't even acknowledge how fortunate we are. So, yeah, Andy, thank you very much for talking to me and taking your time. And anyone who's listening right now and wants to contact you, how can they get in contact with you, maybe ask questions?
Yeah, people can find me on LinkedIn, or I have a website called therightpath.com. They can look at that, and that's just some of the things that I do and some of the blogs that I've written about some of the work that I do. So thank you very much, Ingo. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, thank you very much. I will link the 2 links you just mentioned in the comment section or in the show notes. And thank you very much. And I hope that you always stay safe out there. And yeah, talk to you soon, hopefully. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thanks, Inga. Bye-bye.